Canine dog leads cop to hidden trapdoor. What was beneath shook him. Rain fell in slow. Steady drops as Officer Jonah Reyes walked through the quiet halls of Brookstone High. His black boots made soft echoes on the shiny floor. Beside him walked Orion, his loyal canine partner, a tall, lean Belgian Malinois with alert eyes and a sharp nose. The hallway smelled like cleaning spray and old books. Most of the students had already gone home. A few teachers stayed behind to finish up. Jonah liked these evening patrols. They were peaceful, calm. Ever since a student named Naomi Bell had gone missing 9 days ago, patrols around schools had become tighter. Still, Jonah didn't expect much tonight. That was until Orion stopped. Walking, they had just passed room 317, the old art room that hadn't been used in months. When Orion suddenly froze, his ears perked up, his muscles tensed. Then, without warning, he let out a low growling sound deep from his throat. Jonah stopped and looked down. "What is it, buddy?" he asked softly, putting a hand on the dog's back. Orion's growl grew louder. He stepped closer to the art room door and sniffed hard at the base. Then he pawed at it, whined, and let out a sharp bark. Jonah's eyes narrowed. He knew that bark. It wasn't Orion just being curious. It was a warning. He reached for the doorknob and turned it. Locked. Orion scratched harder, barking now in quick bursts, like he was saying, "Right here. Look now." Jonah bent down and listened closely. At first, he heard nothing. Then just barely, a sound, a soft, broken sob. It was faint but real. His heart jumped. He grabbed his radio. "Dispatch. This is Officer Reyes. I've got a locked door. At Brookstone High, room 317, possible trespasser, requesting backup. Copy that. Reyes. Units are 5 minutes out." But 5 minutes felt too long. He looked at Orion. The dog was whining now, eyes locked on the door. Body tense. Something was happening behind that door. Jonah felt it in his gut. "Hang on," he muttered. Jonah stepped back, lifted his leg, and kicked the door hard. Nothing. He kicked again, and this time the door cracked and burst open. The room inside was dark and dusty. Shelves leaned against the wall. Cobwebs stretched across the ceiling. The only light came from the hallway behind them. Orion darted inside immediately. He sniffed the corners, moved fast, then stopped at a tall wooden cabinet shoved into the far wall. He barked again and began scratching at it like crazy. Jonah followed and shined his flashlight on the floor. The wood under the cabinet looked odd. The baseboard had a small gap. Dust had been disturbed, like something had moved recently. He tugged the cabinet. It was heavy, but with one strong push, it slid just enough. Behind it, hidden against the wall, was a trapdoor. Jonah's heart thudded. Orion sat beside it, tail stiff, whining low like he was warning Jonah to be careful. He crouched and touched the old wooden handle. Cold dust clung to his fingers. He pulled. The trapdoor creaked open with a groan. A rush of air came out, damp, earthy, and strange. Jonah pointed his flashlight into the darkness below. Wooden stairs led down into blackness. Then he heard it again, a voice. "Help. Please help me." That was no imagination. Jonah clicked his radio again. "Dispatch. Race again. I've located a hidden area beneath room 317. Female voice was heard. "I'm going in. Backup still en route." "Roger that. Officers 3 minutes away. Proceed with caution." Jonah drew a deep breath. He looked at Orion. The dog gave him a firm look, as if to say, "Let's do this, all right, partner." Jonah whispered, "Let's find out what's down there." He stepped onto the first creaking stair. It groaned under his weight. Orion followed, nails tapping the old wood. As they descended into the dark, the air grew colder, thicker, and somewhere below, a child was still crying. The wooden stairs groaned under Officer Jonah Reyes' boots as he and Orion, his loyal K-9 partner, moved deeper into the basement. The air was cold and smelled like mold and old paint. Cobwebs hung like curtains, and dust swirled through the beam of Jonah's flashlight. Halfway down, Orion froze. His ears stood tall, his body low to the ground. He growled softly. Jonah paused. "What do you hear, buddy?" He whispered. Then, through the stillness, came the voice again. "Help me." It was soft but clear. A young girl's voice, trembling with fear. Jonah gripped his flashlight tighter. "We're coming," he called out. At the bottom of the stairs, the floor was rough and covered in broken tiles. Paint cans and old chairs were scattered around. But Orion didn't stop. He sniffed the air and headed straight toward a pile of crates stacked in one corner. Behind them was a wall that didn't look quite right. It was different from the others, partly covered with dirty insulation and boards nailed across a small door. Orion barked and clawed at the boards like he was trying to dig through them. "Hold on," Jonah said. He spotted a crowbar leaning against the wall. He grabbed it, jammed it under the wood, and pulled hard. The boards creaked, then snapped. Dust flew everywhere. Inside the small space, huddled in the dark, was a girl. Her clothes were torn, and her hair was tangled. She looked up, eyes wide and full of fear. "It's okay," Jonah said gently. "You're safe now." The girl didn't speak. She just stared at Orion. The dog slowly walked to her and touched her arm with his nose. She flinched at first, then leaned into him and wrapped her arms around his neck. Sobbing, Jonah pulled off his jacket and wrapped it around her. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Naomi," she whispered. "Naomi Bell." Jonah felt his chest tighten. This was the missing girl the whole town had been looking for. "We're going to get you out of here," he said. He clicked his radio. "Dispatch, this is Reyes. I've located Naomi Bell. She's alive. Weak but awake. Send Eames now." Naomi clung tightly to Orion, like he was the only thing she trusted. As Jonah led her back up the stairs, he noticed something in the corner, a small metal box half buried in the dirt. It had a lock and the word "Confidential" scratched across the top. He picked it up. It felt heavier than it looked. Naomi saw the box, and her face went pale. "They said not to touch it," she whispered. "They said we'd all be in trouble if anyone found it." Jonah stared at her. "Who's they?" Naomi shook her head and looked away. Back upstairs, paramedics rushed in and took Naomi on a stretcher. She never let go of Orion's collar until they lifted her into the ambulance. Jonah stayed behind in the art room, holding the metal box. His thoughts spun. Who locked a child under a school? And what was inside this box? That night, back at his apartment, Jonah sat at his kitchen table. The box rested in front of him. Orion lay by his feet, calm but alert. Jonah tried different combinations on the lock. Badge numbers, birth dates, even schoolroom numbers. Nothing worked. Then he remembered what Naomi had said. They said not to touch it. He turned the box over. On the bottom, scratched into the metal, were the letters BHS 317. Brookstone High School. Room 317, the old art room. He turned the dial slowly. 317. Click. The lock popped open. Inside were files, dozens of them, each with a student's name. Some had photos attached. One folder had Naomi's picture, smiling, wearing her school uniform. But the paper inside didn't talk about grades or art. It said words like test subject, reaction report, and phase 2 candidate. Jonah's heart raced. These weren't school files. They were something else. Something wrong. Orion stood up and growled low. Jonah looked at the dog, then at the file spread. Out on the table, something bad happened at that school, he said out loud, and someone went to a lot of trouble to hide it. He picked up the flash drive tucked in the bottom of the box. Tomorrow, he will go back to Brookstone High, but he wouldn't be going alone. The next morning, the sky over Brookstone was gray and heavy with clouds. Officer Jonah Reyes sat in his patrol car, parked outside Brookstone High. The metal box from last night sat on the seat between him and Orion. Inside was the flash drive. Still untouched, Jonah hadn't slept much. He looked at Orion, who sat alert in the passenger seat. "Are you ready?" he asked. Orion gave a soft bark. They walked into the school through the side entrance. It was early. Only a few teachers and students were around. Jonah signed in at the front desk and headed straight to room 317, the art room, yellow crime scene. Tape stretched across the door. Jonah lifted it and stepped inside. The room was quiet and cold. Dust still floated in the air, the trapdoor was still open, and the scent of damp wood still hung in the room. Jonah knelt near the wall and tapped it with his gloved hand. Thud, hollow search. He whispered to Orion. Orion sniffed along the wall, then scratched at a spot near the floor. Jonah examined the baseboard and noticed a thin line, a hidden seam. He stood on a nearby stool and ran his hand along the wall. Near the top corner, he felt a tiny indentation. He pushed it. Click. A small panel popped open. Inside was a narrow space, just wide enough to hide something important. Jonah reached in and pulled out a stack of folders. Each folder had a name. Naomi Bell, Brian Lowry, Rachel Pierce. Students from missing person cases over the last few years. His hands shook as he opened one. Inside were medical charts, test results, and strange notes like subject uncooperative, low resistance, and Needs adjustment. At the bottom of one folder was a phrase written in pen. Access via room 317 basement only. Jonah's stomach dropped. These weren't just missing kids. They had been part of something secret. That's when he heard a noise behind him, the creak of the door. He turned quickly. Mr. Colton Vale, the art teacher, stood in the doorway. He was calm, maybe too calm, Officer Reyes Vale said, stepping into the room slowly. Didn't expect to see you here this early. Jonah stayed still. Orion stood beside him, tense and growling low, you told. You didn't know anything about Naomi, Jonah said, but this stuff was hidden in your classroom. Vale looked around the room. His eyes landed on the open panel, then on the box. He sighed. You weren't supposed to find that. Jonah took a step. Closer. What is this, Mr. Vale? Vale hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket slowly. Orion barked. Easy, Vale said. I'm not armed. He pulled out a small black flash drive and held it between two fingers. This is what you're looking for. It has everything. The whole truth, Jonah stepped forward, about to take it, when heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway. 3 men in dark suits appeared in the doorway. They wore badges and moved like they were in control. Officer Reyes, the man in front, said firmly, hand over the flash drive. Now. Jonah's heart pounded. He looked at Vale. Then, with the flash drive in his hand, Orion growled louder. The man repeated, we won't ask again. Jonah reached out, snatched the flash drive from Vale's hand, and shoved it into his jacket pocket. No, he said, this is evidence. I'm not giving it to you. One of the men stepped forward. That's a mistake. Jonah backed toward the trapdoor. You're not with the local police, are you? The man didn't answer. Just then, the window at the far end of the room shattered. Glass flew everywhere. A masked figure in dark clothes jumped through. Orion launched forward with a loud bark. He bit down on the man's arm, dragging him to the floor. Jonah rushed in, tackled the man, and handcuffed him. He ripped off the mask and froze. It was Rick Ames, the school janitor. You? Jonah asked, shocked. Why would you? Rick looked panicked. I didn't know they locked her in there. I just followed orders. Who's they? Jonah shouted. Before Rick could answer, more footsteps thundered down the hall. They're coming. Vale sighed, eyes wide. Jonah grabbed Rick by the arm. We're leaving. Now, he turned to Orion. Let's go. They ran down the hallway, past the lockers, out into the rain-soaked parking lot. Jonah shoved Rick into the back of his cruiser. Orion jumped into the front seat. Jonah started the car and peeled out just as black SUVs pulled in. In the rearview mirror, he saw Vale standing in the doorway. Watching, waiting, Jonah tightened his grip on the wheel. The flash drive burned in his pocket. This wasn't over, not even close. Officer Jonah Reyes drove fast through the rain, his heart pounding like a drum. Rick Ames, the school janitor, sat in the back seat, shaking with fear. Orion sat in the front passenger seat, ears alert, eyes fixed ahead. The flash drive was safe in Jonah's jacket pocket, but he knew it made him a target. They're not just school staff, Rick said, his voice barely above a whisper. They're bigger than that. Some of them are from the state, maybe even higher. Jonah gripped the wheel tighter. Then we go public. He didn't take Rick home. Instead, he brought him to a trusted friend at a local news station. He asked them to record Rick's full story. Every detail. Jonah handed them copies of the files. And the flash drive. If something happens to me, he said, make sure this airs. Later that night, Jonah sat at home with Orion lying by his feet. The apartment was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator. Jonah had kept the original flash drive. He opened it on his laptop. The files were worse than he thought. There were notes, videos, and emails, plans for testing memory, fear, and obedience in kids. Some of the students had been taken to special programs. Most never returned. Naomi's file had the word resistance stamped in red. Jonah leaned back, shaken. How long has this been going on? He whispered. The next morning, he returned to Brookstone High. It was raining again. The school looked the same from the outside, but he now knew the truth behind its walls. Jonah stepped into room 317 one last time. Crime scene tape still hung. From the door, the trapdoor was now sealed, and investigators had started asking questions. The room felt colder than before, like it was holding its breath. He noticed something taped to the wall. It was a drawing, done in pencil and colored with crayons. A dog standing in front of a broken door. Behind the dog was a small girl with wide eyes. Above them were the words, "He found me," Naomi had drawn. Jonah took a deep breath. Later that day, a press conference was held. The story had gone viral. Parents were shocked. Reporters flooded the school board with questions. The gifted initiative was shut down. Several officials were fired. A full investigation was launched by the state. Naomi, now in safe care, spoke quietly to child services. She told them what happened, how they gave her pills, made her sleep in the dark, and told her to stay quiet. Her testimony helped others come forward. More students shared their stories. Some from other schools. Orion became a local hero. He received a medal from the mayor. Kids wrote letters to him. One girl called him the bravest dog in the world. He wagged his tail, but stayed calm. As always, Jonah was placed on leave for breaking protocol. But people saw him as a hero too. Parents thanked him on the street. A teacher at Brookstone High handed him a small pin with a blue paw print. "For Orion," she said with tears in her eyes. One evening, Jonah visited Naomi at her new group home. She was sitting outside on a bench, drawing quietly. "Hey," Jonah said gently. "I thought you might want to see someone." Orion stepped forward. Naomi's eyes lit up. She dropped her pencil and ran to him, hugging the dog tightly. "I missed you," she whispered. Orion licked her cheek and sat still while she leaned against him. "You okay?" Jonah asked. Naomi nodded slowly. "Better now." She held up her sketchbook. The newest picture showed a staircase leading into the dark and a small light shining from above. "I don't dream about the basement anymore," she said. "I dream about the light." Jonah smiled. "Good. You're safe now." Before leaving, she handed him one last drawing. It showed Jonah and Orion standing in front of Brookstone High, with the word truth written above them. Jonah drove home in silence. The world felt different now, less safe, but more honest. He knew there were still people trying to hide the truth, but he also knew one thing for sure. He wouldn't stop fighting, and neither would Orion. As the sun broke through the clouds, Jonah looked down at his partner and said, "Let's find the next shadow to chase." "Buddy," Orion barked once, and they kept walking together.
Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Love Tales of Tales, for long, heartwarming pets and animals. Love stories that stay with you long after they end.